Hi, everyone, and welcome back to True Crime Echoes. This is the place where we dive deep into real stories of crime betrayal and the dark corners of human behavior that still haunt us today. In tonight's episode, we're going back to Halloween night, 1974, in Deer Park, Texas. It's a story that would forever change the way parents look at trick-or-treating. A story about trust, about betrayal, and about how one man turned a night of joy into a nightmare. This is the case of Ronald O'Bryan, better known as the Candyman. Chapter 1: A Halloween Like No Other. Halloween is supposed to be fun. Costumes, candy kids, running door to door, laughing with their friends. It's one of those nights where the whole neighborhood feels alive. But on October 31st, 1974, in Deer Park, Texas, Halloween turned into a nightmare. That night, a little boy named Timothy O'Bryan went trick-or-treating with his father, his sister, and some neighborhood kids. He came home with a bag full of candy, the kind every child dreams of. And like most kids, he couldn't wait to eat something sweet before bed. His father handed him one of those giant pixie sticks, 21 inches of pure sugar. Timothy opened it up, poured it into his mouth, and immediately complained that it tasted bitter, strange, not like candy at all. His father gave him a drink to wash it down. Within minutes, Timothy clutched his stomach, crying out in pain. He vomited, collapsed, and started convulsing on the bathroom floor. His father held him as his small body went limp. By the time paramedics arrived, it was too late. Timothy never made it to the hospital. News spread quickly a child had died from poisoned Halloween candy. And just like that, the community's favorite night of the year became the source of their greatest fear. Parents snatched candy bags away from their children, police collected sweets by the bucketful, and rumors swirled that some monster out there was handing out poisoned treats to innocent kids. But the real story behind Timothy's death would turn out to be far more disturbing and far closer to home than anyone could have imagined. Chapter 2: The Man Behind the Mask. To understand what happened on that Halloween night, we have to look at the man holding Timothy in his arms, Ronald Clark O'Bryan. On the surface, Ronald was the kind of person you'd never suspect. He worked as an optician fitting glasses and contact lenses at Texas State Optical in Houston. He was also active in his church, serving as a deacon, singing in the choir, even running the bus program that brought kids to Sunday school. To neighbors and fellow churchgoers, Ronald looked like a devoted husband and father, the picture of a responsible family man. At home, he lived with his wife Deneen and their two children, Timothy, just 8 years old, and Elizabeth, his little sister. The family lived in Deer Park, a quiet middle-class community, where everyone knew each other. From the outside, they looked ordinary, maybe even admirable. But appearances can be deceiving. Ronald was struggling to hold things together. Over the past decade, he'd bounced through more than 20 jobs, never able to keep one for long. He was drowning in debt, about $100,000 worth. His car was on the verge of repossession. The family home had been foreclosed on. And there were whispers of theft at his workplace trouble following him wherever he went. What's so unsettling is how perfectly Ronald played his role in public. At church, he was respected, trusted with responsibilities, even admired. No one saw the cracks forming behind closed doors. No one knew that this father, who seemed to embody faith and family values, was desperate, cornered, and looking for a way out. It's often said that the people who work hardest to appear good are sometimes hiding the darkest truths. And in Ronald O'Bryan's case, that couldn't have been more accurate. Chapter 3: Trick or Treat. Halloween night, 1974, started out like any other for the O'Bryan family. Ronald decided to take Timothy and Elizabeth trick-or-treating. They went with a neighbor and his two children, making it a little group outing for kids, dressed up running from house to house, bags filling with candy, the kind of memory most parents cherish. But Ronald had chosen a different neighborhood in Pasadena, not far from where they lived. It was a wealthier area, the kind of place people assumed gave out the good stuff. Full-size candy bars, not the cheap minis. Parents do this all the time, right? Drive a little further, walk a little longer, all for the promise of better candy. The kids ran up to a dark house. The lights were off. No decorations, the kind of place you'd normally skip. They knocked anyway, shouted trick or treat, and waited. No one answered. Impatient, the kids ran off toward the next house, laughing and chasing one another in the drizzle. Ronald stayed behind. A few minutes later, he caught up with the group, holding 5 giant pixie sticks, 21-inch tubes filled with colored sugar. He told the kids someone had answered the door after all, and that he'd been given these massive candies to hand out. "You should have waited," he said. Smiling, "This guy's giving away the good stuff." The children's eyes lit up. Pixie sticks were rare, exciting, the kind of candy that makes a kid's night. Ronald gave 2 to his neighbor's children, 1 to Timothy and 1 to Elizabeth. Later that evening, when another boy from church came to the door trick-or-treating, Ronald handed him the 5th. It seemed like just another act of generosity, a dad sharing extra candy with the kids around him. But what no one realized at the time was that those pixie sticks weren't a lucky Halloween score. They were a death sentence waiting to be opened. Chapter 4. The Last Piece of Candy. When the O'Bryan family returned home from trick-or-treating, the children did what every kid does on Halloween night. They dumped their bags of candy out, sorting through the piles, eyes wide at the treasures they'd collected. They begged their father to let them eat something before bed. Ronald agreed, but with one condition: only 1 piece of candy each. Tomorrow, he promised they could indulge a little more. Then he did something strange. Instead of letting Timothy choose, Ronald picked the candy for him. He reached into the pile and pulled out the giant pixie stick he'd brought back from that dark house. Timothy tore it open, tilting the long paper tube to pour the sugary powder into his mouth. But the candy didn't flow easily. It clumped, sticking to the sides. Ronald stepped in, helping shake the powder loose. At last, the sweet dust poured into Timothy's mouth. Almost immediately, Timothy complained. The candy tasted bitter, not sweet like he expected. Ronald handed him a glass of Kool-Aid to wash it down, reassuring him that it was fine. But within minutes, Timothy doubled over, clutching his stomach in pain. He ran to the bathroom, vomiting violently, his small body trembling. Then he collapsed to the floor, convulsing foam at his lips. Ronald rushed in, saying later that his son went limp in his arms. Someone called 911 and paramedics arrived quickly, but there was nothing they could do. On the way to the hospital, Timothy O'Bryan, just 8 years old, died in the back of the ambulance. Word spread like wildfire. A child had been poisoned by Halloween candy. Parents panicked, tearing away bags of sweets from their children, terrified that every piece could be laced with poison. Police urged families to turn in candy so it could be tested. For the first time, the urban legend every parent secretly feared that someone might hand out poisoned treats on Halloween seemed horrifyingly real. But the truth would soon prove even more terrifying, because this wasn't the work of a stranger hiding behind a dark doorway. This horror didn't come from some faceless neighbor. It came from within Timothy's own family. Chapter 5. The investigation begins. As soon as Timothy's death was confirmed, the investigation went into overdrive. Police knew this wasn't an accident, this was poison. An autopsy later revealed cyanide in Timothy's system, enough to kill 2 adults, let alone 1 small child. That discovery only deepened the panic. If 1 pixie stick was poisoned, how many others were out there? How many children could be in danger? Officers scrambled to track down the other candies Ronald had handed out that night. Miraculously, every single pixie stick was recovered before another child could eat it. Some had been tucked away in candy bags. 1 had been placed under a child's pillow, almost eaten in the middle of the night. The parents of those kids narrowly avoided the same tragedy that struck Timothy. When investigators examined the candy, they noticed something sloppy. The ends of the pixie sticks had been opened and resealed with staples. Inside the brightly colored tubes of sugar was cyanide powder hidden where no child would ever expect it. Whoever did this had intended to kill and kill children specifically. Naturally, police turned to Ronald O'Bryan for answers. After all, he was the one who had received the pixie sticks. Where did they come from? Who gave them out? Ronald's story was shaky from the start. He told investigators that at one dark house, a man had cracked open the door, never showing his face, and simply handed him the candy through the gap. He claimed all he saw was a hairy arm in the shadows. When police pressed him to point out the house, Ronald struggled. He led them through the neighborhood, but seemed unable to remember exactly where it was. His story shifted, his memory failed, and investigators began to doubt him. At first, suspicion fell on a nearby homeowner. Police even arrested the man, only to quickly learn he had an airtight alibi. He was at work at the airport the entire evening. His wife and daughter had been home, but they'd turned off the lights early because they ran out of candy. It wasn't them. That left investigators with an unsettling question. If Ronald couldn't or wouldn't identify the house, then how exactly did those pixie sticks end up in his hands? And why did his story feel like smoke and mirrors? The community was terrified, desperate for answers. But the more police dug, the more they started to wonder if the real threat wasn't some faceless stranger lurking behind a dark doorway. Maybe the killer was standing right beside Timothy all along. Chapter 6: A Father's Secret. As investigators kept circling back to Ronald O'Bryan, more and more cracks began to show in his carefully polished image. On the surface, he was still the church deacon, the choir singer the man neighbors trusted. But behind closed doors, his life was crumbling. Ronald had been through 21 jobs in just 10 years. He was drowning in debt over $100,000. His car was on the verge of repossession, his home had already been foreclosed on, and banks were chasing him for defaulted loans. He was a man out of options, backed into a corner. And then came the most disturbing discovery of all. Just months before Halloween, Ronald had taken out life insurance policies on both Timothy and Elizabeth. At first, it was $10,000 per child. Then, only a month before Halloween, he quietly increased the amount to $20,000 each. By the time Timothy died, the total payout would have been $40,000. To put it bluntly, Timothy's death wasn't random. It looked like a financial plan. The morning after Timothy died, before his body was even laid to rest, Ronald called the insurance company to ask how soon he could collect. That single act spoke volumes. His son had just died in agony, and his first thought was about money. Investigators began piecing it together, the debts, the insurance, the poisoned candy that only Ronald seemed to have. He'd been trying to craft a story about a faceless stranger handing out poisoned sweets, but the evidence pointed to a different truth. The killer wasn't a monster hiding in the shadows of Halloween night. The killer was a desperate father who saw his children as dollar signs. The image of Ronald holding Timothy as he died, then turning around the next morning to ask about an insurance payout, it's almost too cold to believe. And yet, that's exactly what the evidence suggested. Chapter 7: The Trial of the Candyman. By the time Ronald O'Bryan was arrested, the pieces of the puzzle painted a chilling picture. Investigators had more than just financial motive. They had physical evidence, too. When police searched Ronald's home, they found a pair of scissors with plastic residue on the blades, residue that matched the same type of plastic used to reseal the pixie sticks. It wasn't a smoking gun, but it was damning. Then came the testimony from people who knew him. One of his professors from community college recalled Ronald asking strange questions during class questions like, "What's more lethal, cyanide, or another kind of poison?" Who asks that casually? Another witness, a chemical supply worker, remembered a man coming in, asking about buying cyanide. He couldn't swear it was Ronald, but he did recall the customer wearing a blue smock, the same kind Ronald wore to work as an optician. All of it started stacking up. Ronald's story about a mystery man with a hairy arm handing out poison candy looked thinner and thinner by the day. Prosecutors argued it was simple. Ronald had laced the candy himself, handed it to his children and others to make it look random, and then directed Timothy to eat the poisoned pixie stick to cash in on the insurance money. The trial began in June of 1975, and it didn't take long for the jury to make up their minds. It took them just 46 minutes to find Ronald O'Bryan guilty of capital murder, and 4 counts of attempted murder for the other children he tried to poison that night. Then came the sentencing. 71 minutes later, the jury unanimously agreed Ronald deserved the death penalty. He became known by a new name in the press: the Candyman, the father who poisoned Halloween. His wife filed for divorce soon after cutting all ties, and Ronald was sent to death row at the Huntsville unit in Texas, where even hardened inmates despised him. To them, there was nothing lower than a man who would kill his own child. In the eyes of the court, in the eyes of the community, Ronald O'Bryan wasn't just a murderer. He was a father who betrayed the deepest trust imaginable, trading his son's life for a chance at $40,000. Chapter 8. The Final Trick or Treat. After the trial, Ronald O'Bryan was sent to death row at the Huntsville unit in Texas, and even there, among murderers and hardened criminals, he was despised. Inmates who had committed unspeakable acts still looked down on him because Ronald had done something they couldn't forgive. He had killed his own child. Word spread through the prison, and Ronald became an outcast in the very place where society's most dangerous men lived. He spent nearly a decade appealing his sentence, maintaining his innocence, insisting that some mysterious stranger had slipped him the poisoned candy. But every court saw the same thing, a mountain of evidence, and a man unwilling to admit what he had done. His appeals failed one after another. Finally, on March 31st, 1984, Ronald O'Bryan's time ran out. Shortly after midnight, he was executed by lethal injection. In his final statement, he still refused to confess. He claimed the death penalty was wrong, that he hadn't committed the crime. To the very end, he clung to the lie. But outside the prison walls, the mood was anything but somber. A crowd of about 300 people gathered, many of them locals who remembered the fear that swept their community in 1974. As the execution took place, they cheered. Some even shouted the words "trick or treat" into the night. It was a grim, almost surreal reminder that Ronald had taken one of the happiest traditions for children and turned it into a weapon. Inside, his life ended quietly. Outside, his name lived on as a warning. Ronald O'Bryan became a symbol of parental betrayal, the man who poisoned Halloween. And although Timothy was the only child who died that night, every parent in America felt the chill of his actions. For years after whispers about poisoned Halloween candy haunted neighborhoods everywhere, the truth was that it had only happened once. But once was enough. Chapter 9. Reflections on Betrayal. When we think about Halloween, we think about costumes and candy, about kids running from door to door, safe under the watch of their parents. But the case of Ronald O'Bryan turned that tradition into something darker. It reminded the world that sometimes the real danger doesn't come from a stranger's doorstep. It comes from within the walls of your own home. Timothy O'Bryan was just 8 years old. He had no reason to doubt the candy his father handed him, no reason to question the man he trusted most in the world. And that's what makes this case so devastating. It wasn't just murder, it was betrayal at the deepest, most personal level, a father choosing money over the life of his son. To this day, Ronald O'Bryan is remembered as the Candy Man. His crime sparked decades of fear around poisoned Halloween treats. Parents across America began checking their children's candy-tearing wrappers open, searching for staples or tampering because of what happened in Deer Park, Texas. In reality, cases like this are almost non-existent. But urban legends don't need to be common to take root. One child's death, one father's crime was enough to change the way generations approached Halloween night. What makes this story linger is the question it leaves behind. How could a man do this to his own child? Was $40,000 worth a young life, worth the trust of a family, worth destroying everything? It's hard to even wrap your mind around. And maybe that's why this case continues to echo nearly 50 years later. For me, it's a chilling reminder that evil isn't always a masked stranger at the door. Sometimes it's the person you least expect, the one standing right beside you, smiling as they hand you a piece of candy. That's the story of Ronald O'Bryan, the man who poisoned his own son with a piece of Halloween candy. Almost 50 years later, his crime is still remembered every October, every time parents double-check their children's candy bags. For me, what's most haunting isn't just the murder, it's the betrayal. The fact that the danger didn't come from a stranger's house, but from a father's own hand. And that, I think, is why this case will never be forgotten. I'd love to know what you think. Did the death penalty fit the crime? Or do you believe Ronald's punishment should have been different? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you found this story compelling, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode of True Crime Echoes. We'll be back next week with another case that will make you question just how well you really know the people around you. Until then, stay safe, make good choices, and always check your candy.